I woke up with the feeling that the world had stopped spinning. For a moment, the silence was so thick it seemed to swallow me whole. Then came the sound. It always comes. The wind whistling through the cracks in the metalwork, making the structure of the shelter creak like an old man about to collapse. It's like this every morning, if there are any real mornings anymore. It took me a while to get up. My joints were complaining, my body was heavy. Sleeping on concrete takes years off us. I think I've already lost about 20. I put on my jacket and laced up my boots with the haste of someone who expects nothing. Nothing more than another day like any other. I sat for a while, watching the shadows of the slats dance across the floor. The sun was still shy, filtered through layers of dust that floated like specters. It was hard to tell what time it was. Here, time stood still long ago. I reached out and pulled my backpack closer. The water bottle was almost empty. I drank just enough to fool my body. I've learned to control my thirst like someone controlling hope. If you overdo it, the desert will charge you with interest. I grabbed the recorder. It stays by my side when I sleep. I don't even know if it's because I'm afraid someone will take it, or if it's just because, in a way, it's the only company I have left. It's where my daughter's voice lives, Sophie. I pressed play. And there she was, just like always. "Daddy, Daddy, look, I'm recording now, okay? Say something silly." Her laugh, it still cuts like glass. 5 seconds. The exact time the world was whole, before everything fell apart, before I lost her. I paused the recording. I took a deep breath, and I walked over to the wall. There, with a piece of charcoal, I make lines, one per day. There are so many that I don't even know if any of them repeat. Maybe I'm counting the same days more than once. Maybe I'm just trying to convince myself that I'm still moving forward. Beside the lines are her drawings, childish scribbles made with old chalk, a smiling sun, a crooked house, and the two of us holding hands. Sometimes I sit there for hours, just staring, pretending she's still around. I moved a wooden box under the mattress. It was where we kept our precious things, the few that remained. A photo, a small sock, a hairband. I took the photo. Sophie must have been about 4 years old. Round cheeks, huge eyes. We were at a fair, I think. She was holding a purple balloon. Behind the photo, my own scribble. Sophie, 5 years old. Ice cream day. But I no longer remember the taste of ice cream, or the day. I only remember what I lost. Sometimes I try to remember her voice without the recorder, but everything comes out jumbled, as if the memory were sand slipping through my fingers. I cling to these fragments because they're all I have left of her. That and the guilt. My stomach growled. I grabbed a can of food from my backpack, the last one. Beans with meat, expired 2 years ago, but still good. I carefully opened it with my pocket knife. The sound of the lid being ripped off reminded me of the night she'd tried to open a jar of olives by herself and dropped everything on the floor. She cried as if the world had ended. I laughed. Now it seems ironic. I ate slowly. Each bite tasted of rust and longing. After eating, I lay down again, just for a few minutes, just to feel the weight of the concrete bed remind me that I'm still here, alive and trapped. I looked at the ceiling and let my mind wander. What happened to her? Is she still alive? Do you remember me? Sometimes I think that if I die here, no one will notice. No one will feel it. My name will vanish with the wind. But if I find her, if I hear her voice again, it will have all been worth it. The wind grew stronger. It made the metal sheet tremble. The structure creaked loudly, like a groan. I stood up. It was time to leave, to try to find something, anything, a sign. Before leaving, I crouched down in front of the small wooden box and touched the photo once more, as if apologizing, then tucked the recorder into my jacket pocket, grabbed my water bottle, and checked the compass. It was failing again, but at least it pointed in a direction. At the door, I hesitated. Out there are no promises, just sand, silence, and dead memories. But I had this feeling, strange, uneasy, that something would be different today. I don't know why. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe the way Sophie's recording sounded, like she wasn't alone. I shook my head. Nonsense. The illusion of someone who listens too much to the past. I pushed open the steel door, and the desert light blinded me for a second. I took a deep breath and took my first step into what I thought would be just another day. The sun hit me like a punch, hard, direct. It forced me to squeeze my eyes shut, to cover my face with my hand. Even after all this time, it still hurt to face the harsh brightness of the desert. It was as if the light carried anger. Outside, everything remained dead. Silence, dust, shards of civilization scattered everywhere, as if the world had exploded in slow motion. The city lay in the distance, dissolved in a haze of heat and sand, a shadow of its former self. Ahead of me, the cracked road stretched like a scar across the face of the planet. I walked along it, unsure of my destination. Here, walking is almost a ritual. You move not because you expect something, but because stopping would mean accepting that it's over. My boots sank into the sand, accumulated between the broken asphalt. Sometimes I passed abandoned cars, covered to the roof. There were clothes hanging from antennas, decapitated dolls, open suitcases with book pages flying out. It was as if time had died in the middle of an escape. Some of the streetlights still had rusty signs. I read one that said, "Urban Zone, 4 km." It was a lie. What they used to call the urban zone was now just bare concrete and the skeletons of buildings. But I went anyway, because it was all I had left. I knew the area, sort of, not from maps. Maps are useless anymore, but by instinct. I had a shelter nearby where I'd spent a few weeks a while back. I decided to go there. Maybe there would be something useful left behind, or at least walls to protect me from the sun. On the way, I found a pair of children's glasses on the ground, pink with glitter on the arms. I picked them up and wiped them on my jacket, as if some girl were still coming back for them. I put them in my pocket. I don't know why. Maybe because I remembered her. Sophie loved shiny things. I arrived at the shelter shortly before noon. It was an old gas station, half swallowed by sand. The sign was crumbling, and the windows had long since shattered. I entered slowly, as if visiting a tomb. Inside, everything seemed frozen in time. The cashier still had a cracked monitor, empty shelves, an overturned chair. And the smell, that sour smell of time standing still. Behind the counter, I opened a drawer and found a rusty lighter, a fossilized piece of gum, and a torn postcard, a beach with impossibly blue waters. I grabbed the lighter. You never know. I went to the back. There was a small windowless room. I remember sleeping there once, sheltered from the storms. I leaned against the wall and allowed myself to sit, just for a moment. My body needed it. I laid my head on my arm and closed my eyes. Outside, the wind whistled through the rubble, as if whispering ancient secrets. and suddenly I heard something. It wasn't the sound of wind. It was a higher-pitched whisper. Human. I stood up, alert. I waited. Nothing. But then it came again, a muffled sound like a recording. My fingers ran to my pocket. The recorder? But I hadn't turned it on. I pressed the button. Sophie's voice began to play.
Daddy, Daddy, look, I'm recording now, okay? Say something silly.
That was what I needed to hear. Her voice again anchoring me. But there was something strange. For a split second, deep in the recording, I swear I heard a different sound, like a noise, muffled speech. But I didn't understand. It was fast, uncertain. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. I stopped recording. I took a deep breath. I couldn't let myself get carried away. I returned to the store area. I rummaged around again. I found a broken bottle, and next to it, a partially burned notebook. I grabbed what was left. The first few pages were charred, but there were legible passages further back. Scattered words, a crude drawing of a tower. Observation Tower, East. That made me frown. Tower? I didn't know any towers around here, at least not nearby. But the word resonated with me, like a whisper calling from afar. I closed the notebook and put it away. I grabbed my backpack and headed back to the road. There wasn't enough shelter there, and that place made me uneasy, as if someone was still nearby, even if invisible. I started walking again. The sun was sinking slowly, but it was still burning. The horizon trembled with heat. It was like walking on liquid fire. After a few minutes, I saw something in the distance. A figure. Small. Alone. He stopped too. Instinct made my hand go to the knife. The figure approached, slowly. The steps were careful but firm. When he got close enough, I could see. A man, maybe my age, covered in dust, with a thin beard and an alert look. He was carrying a small backpack and holding a branch as a cane. He assessed me, as if trying to decide if I was a threat. I did the same. Silence. Then he said, "I didn't expect to find anyone here." His voice was hoarse but calm. "Neither have I," I replied. "It's been months since I last spoke to anyone." He nodded. "Nathan," he said, extending his hand. I hesitated. Then I pressed. "Ethan." We stared at each other for a moment, as if trying to figure each other out, like dogs sniffing out fear. That's when he looked at my chest and pointed. Is that a recorder?" I nodded, a little reluctantly. I reached into my pocket, feeling the familiar contours of the device. It was automatic, almost protective. But he continued to stare with that arched eyebrow, a mocking smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "How pathetic," he muttered. "You record it and expect someone to hear it?"
Those words hit me like a sharp slap. I swallowed hard. My throat burned. But it wasn't from thirst. "That," I replied, my voice low at first but growing stronger, "is what keeps me alive." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "It's the only thing I have left of my daughter," I continued, looking him straight in the eye. "The only voice I still hear. Without it, I would have been lost long ago. Maybe I'd already be buried along with the rest of the world." Silence. His smile disappeared. I don't know if it was out of respect or embarrassment. My chest rose and fell slowly. The recorder still felt heavy in my hand as if it were made of lead. He looked away, rummaged through his backpack. He didn't say anything else. The wind passed between us, kicking up sand, and for a moment, everything was silent again.
Nathan was silent for a moment. He stared at the ground, but seemed to be listening to something inside his own head. I didn't know what he was thinking, and honestly, I didn't care. I'd grown accustomed to the silence of others. It was the sound of the words that bothered me. But then he spoke, almost in a whisper. "Let me hear." I frowned. "What?" "The recording. Your daughter's voice. Can I hear it?" I found myself hesitating. It was strange, too intimate for someone I barely knew. But at the same time, there was something in his voice that didn't sound like mockery. It sounded like urgency. I took a deep breath. I pulled the recorder out slowly, as if I were pulling a heart from my chest. I placed it on one of the rocks, right between us. The device still worked. It was a miracle. The buttons were worn down, and the battery cover was taped shut. But it was still my bridge to what was left. I pressed play. And then she spoke again.
"Daddy, Daddy, look, I'm recording now, okay? Say something silly."
Her voice, brilliant, full of life. That laugh I'd almost forgotten. Just hearing it made my eyes burn. Each time I heard it, it felt like my soul crumbled a little more, and at the same time, it was rebuilding itself. Nathan tilted his head. His eyes narrowed. He leaned closer, placing his ear closer to the speaker. His face changed. First surprise, then something like recognition. "Rewind," he said seriously, as if he were giving an order. "What?" "Rewind, back to the end. Let it play again." I did as he asked. I pressed the button carefully, and Sophie's voice returned. Laughter, background noise, crackling, a distant, muffled sound I'd never been able to decipher. But now, Nathan was paying attention with a strange intensity. When he finished, he looked up. "There's someone talking in the background, almost imperceptible, but it's there." "Like this?" A male voice. "It's not English, it's Portuguese." That stopped me inside. "He's sure about this?" He nodded slowly, as if he were weighing words. "Absolutely. I grew up hearing that language. My mother spoke it. My father hid it. I tried to forget, but certain things stick. The voice says, 'Target confirmed, awaiting pickup confirmation for Sector 9. My stomach turned. That name, that damned name. I'd seen it painted on walls, whispered by refugees passing through the South. Some thought it was a shelter. Others said it was a place where people were taken and no one returned. Now I was on my daughter's recording. "Are you sure about this?" I asked more to myself than to him. Nathan didn't answer immediately. He picked up a small stone from the ground and began to roll it between his fingers. "I wouldn't ask you to believe me, but that voice, it shouldn't have been there. And if Sophie recorded it, then maybe she was close to that sector, or whoever controls it." My heart was pounding. My hands were sweating. I've listened to this recording over 200 times. I never noticed that voice. Why now? Nathan shrugged. Sometimes we only listen to what we're ready to listen to. I stared at the recorder, still running, as if I could coax some truth from it. Sophie was there somewhere, in a lost echo, in a frequency buried by time. Nathan stood up, dusting himself off.
Where did you record this? Before the collapse, in the old relay house, a tower near the lower part of the city. Is that tower still standing? I nodded slowly. It must be. I never went back there. It was too dangerous back then. Maybe it's time to go back. I remained silent. He was right. But returning there meant more than facing ruins. It meant facing ghosts, revisiting memories I'd rather leave buried beneath the dust. And yet, deep in his chest, something burned. A spark. Hope? Perhaps. And even if it was just that, it was already more than I had yesterday.
The tower was to the east, or at least, I thought it was. So much had collapsed that landmarks were rubble. But I remembered the old power lines. I remembered the rusted signs. And the cracked hill, just past the intersection where my daughter used to run. After what Nathan heard on the recording, it stopped being just a refuge from the past. It became a map. A beacon shining in the darkness, even if its light burned my eyes. I adjusted my backpack. The leather straps were worn and cutting into my shoulders. I had only a canteen with 2 fingers of water and a packet of stale crackers left. I knew that if I made it there and came back alive, it would be a miracle. Going alone? Nathan asked, looking at me with the look of someone who's seen too many people leave and never come back. I've always been alone, I replied dryly. But don't worry, I can manage. He nodded. He pulled a small knife, wrapped in a piece of cloth, from his pocket and handed it to me. Here, just to be safe. The road takes a heavy toll on those who trust in luck too much. I accepted without protest. That blade was smaller than mine, but sharper, the kind that sneaks in without asking permission. There were no goodbyes. I walked slowly, crossing the cracked street, passing charred cars and the skeletons of buildings with windows like gaping mouths. The wind carried sand and old papers, creating a constant whisper that mingled with my footsteps. At every corner, a memory. At every ruin, an echo of what we once were. I saw a fallen school. The sign still read, "Educating is sowing the future." I wondered what kind of future that was. Maybe only dead seeds remained. I kept walking. The sunlight was already low, tinting everything a burnt orange. When the tower's shadow appeared on the horizon, my chest tightened. It stood there, standing like a monument to time, rusted, leaning, but still standing. It was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was the bigger one inside, heavier with memories. I approached slowly. The wire gate was down. There were signs of looters, boot prints, the remains of campfires. Not a single living soul. I climbed the outside steps carefully. With each step, the metal creaked, threatening to give way. My sweaty hands gripped the corroded railing. The wind up there was colder, more biting. When I reached the top, I stopped, and I breathed. From there, I could see everything. Ruins spread out like an ancient battlefield. Concrete blocks, iron bones, dust stretching to the horizon. And in the middle of it all, the road. A thin, almost faded trail that wound through the rubble and disappeared in the south, where the sky met the earth. I closed my eyes for a moment. There, at that very spot, 5 years ago, I had recorded Sophie for the last time. She was eating cookies, laughing, and trying to tune the radio. The antenna was still there, dangling from a crooked wire. It was supposed to be just a joke. But that sound,
That frequency had captured more than laughter. Now I knew it. I rummaged through the base of the tower. I sifted through the torn papers and exposed cables. I found a metal box, locked but easy to pry open. Inside, bits of old equipment. Transmitters, microphones, corroded batteries. And there at the bottom, a small notebook. The pages were damp, stained, but still legible. Date, July 12th. We intercepted an incomplete transmission. Unidentified language. Source appears to be coming from the south point of the restricted perimeter. There, atop the tower, with the wind whipping and the dead city around me, everything seemed to move, as if the pieces were starting to fit together, only in a puzzle I never asked to put together. I picked up the recorder and played the tape again. And there it was, amid the noise of people talking and the wind, hidden behind my little girl's voice, another voice, in another language, barely audible, that I now knew what it meant. Target confirmed, awaiting pickup confirmation for Sector 9. I had a direction, a clue, one chance. I packed everything in my backpack. Before descending, I stared at the horizon one last time. The sun was already disappearing behind the ruins, and shadows danced across the streets. It was time to move on. I didn't know what I'd find beyond the black crater, but if Sophie had been there, then so would I, even if it were the last step of my life.
Coming down from that tower was harder than going up. His body still ached, his heart even more so. My footsteps sounded heavy on the metal stairs, as if something wanted me to stay up there, still, staring at the past. But it wasn't possible anymore. I had a direction now, even if uncertain, even if suicidal. Still, it was a direction. The words from the recording, which I couldn't pronounce, hammered in my mind like rusty nails. Target confirmed, awaiting pickup confirmation for Sector 9. Target. Collection. Sector 9. Was my daughter the target? The idea turned my stomach. But scarier than that was the thought that that voice was never meant for me. It was just there, recorded by chance in the background of Sophie's laughter. A mistake. A digital ghost that spent years screaming from inside an old device, and I never noticed. Until Nathan.
I walked to the foot of the hill, and when I looked south, it was like staring into the mouth of a monster that was waiting for me with open teeth. The road wasn't a road at all. It was an ancient crack in the asphalt, lined with the skeletons of fallen streetlights and signs. The entire area seemed suspended in a suffocating silence. No birds, no insects, not even the sounds of creaking buildings or tarps flapping in the wind. It was the silence of the end. I remember the last time I'd walked so far. It was when I'd gone out looking for food for our hiding place. Sophie was still little. Leah, my beloved wife, hugged me before I left and said, "Come back soon. She won't sleep without hearing your voice." Now, neither she sleeps, neither do I. The heat increased as the sun rose. The dust clung to the skin like a second skin. Every step left me drier inside. The water in my canteen ran out before noon. My mouth felt like it was full of crushed glass. And then I started seeing the bones. First they were animals, dogs perhaps. Then humans. Some still wore backpacks. One had a crooked gas mask hanging from his face. I tried to ignore it. I moved on. But there are things we can't ignore. They stick to the soul of our conscience. I sat down on a piece of broken concrete covered in dry moss. I picked up the recorder. I didn't touch the tape. I just held it. "Hi, Princess." My voice came out almost a whisper. "Today, Daddy is going after what you let slip. And if I'm right, you're still around. You're still waiting for me." Maybe I cried. Maybe it was just sweat. By mid-afternoon, the buildings had disappeared. I was replaced by what remained of the suburbs. Open houses, mud-covered gardens, headless dolls discarded on the sidewalk. And further on, nothing. The city gave way to the desert. Literally. The sand had swallowed everything, as if the world had decided to erase human error with a blanket of dust. That was where the trail began, the same one I had seen from the tower. In the distance, I saw the remains of an overpass. Half of it was on the ground, as if it had collapsed after an earthquake. There was something hanging from one of the columns, a body.
Hanged, with a plaque written in charcoal. "Burglar." I stopped. I looked around. No sign of who did it. But the message was clear. Out here, there were no laws, only judgments. And justice was as shaky as the sand I walked on. I started walking again. The backpack weighed more. The recorder, inside the pocket, seemed to pulse against my chest like a second heart. At night, the temperature dropped. The desert, once a furnace, now felt like liquid ice on the bones. I found shelter in the ruins of a demolished trailer. I lit a piece of cloth soaked in the last bit of rubbing alcohol I had. The flame barely illuminated, but at least it dispelled the absolute darkness. That's when I heard the sound. Weak, distant. An engine? No. A humming sound, low and constant. I left slowly, crawling through the sand. I hid behind a fallen sign, and then I saw it. Drones. 3 of them, flying overhead with small red lights, silent but relentless. They scanned the ground with light beams, and then they left. I walked back to the trailer, my heart pounding in my throat. Sector 9 was not a legend. They were there, looking for something or someone. Sophie? I took a deep breath. I leaned against the wall. My eyes felt heavy, but I had to stay alert. No sleep. Not now. As the fire died down, I stared into space. Nathan's words as he translated the recording repeated in my mind like a twisted mantra.
Target confirmed. Awaiting pickup confirmation for Sector 9.
It was her. It had to be her. And if it weren't, may this road at least lead me to the truth, even if in the end only bones remain. Mine. I woke to the sound of gravel crunching under heavy boots. Instinct, not reason. I jumped out of the trailer like a cornered animal. I rolled in the sand and hid behind a piece of what remained of the bumper. A figure passed in front of the trailer. 2, actually, armed. Real weapons. Rare, expensive. This meant only one thing. They were well stocked. Mercenaries. I saw many like them when the world began to fall apart, looters who organized themselves into groups with stupid names like the Burned, the Ravenous, the Oxide Dogs, people who thrive on the weakness of others. And that was my greatest weakness. I was alone. "There are signs of recent use here," one of them said, his voice muffled by a rudimentary mask. "Fire mark,
Footprints? It can't be far, replied the other. I tried to control my breathing. If they had dogs, I was dead. If they had a good sense of smell, about the same. I crept slowly along the side of the trailer, crawling like a worm. My backpack scraped against the sand, the recorder pressed against my chest like a condemnation. I thought of Sophie, of Leah. I can't die now. A crack of stone gave me away. They turned. Run. The first bullet passed too close. It buzzed beside my ear like a mosquito from hell. I dove behind a charred car. Another shot. Glass shattered beside me. The shards cut my arm. "Show yourself, you bastard!" one of them shouted. I responded with silence. I picked up a piece of broken mirror from the floor. I used it to peer in. They were divided, circling the flank. There, I saw my chance. I got up and ran to the right, letting my backpack slide behind me as bait. They fell into the trap. When they reached it, I jumped behind a stack of blocks and sprinted around the opposite side. I ran until my lungs screamed, until my legs threatened to give out. The next thing I knew, I was on a rocky slope, a sort of crevice in the earth. I slipped, rolled down the slope, scratching my arms, tearing my shirt, but I escaped. I lay down right there, at the bottom of the crevice, in the middle of nowhere. And I laughed, a weak laugh, half despair, half relief. "You're getting good at this, Ethan. Just a little longer, and you'll be a pro at not dying." I closed my eyes, just for a few seconds. I woke to a red-tinged sky. The sun was saying a violent goodbye, spitting fire on the horizon. I walked a little further. My legs were weak, my feet raw inside my boots. I had to tear a piece of my shirt to bandage the wound on my arm. The blood was still dripping. The pain no longer bothered me. The body, after a while, gives up complaining. It's the mind that carries on, and that's where hell resides. I saw a small structure in the distance, broken pillars, perhaps an old gas station. I approached cautiously. No one in sight. I went in. The roof was partially collapsed, but there was shade, and most importantly, shelter. Rummaging through the rubble, I found a metal box. Inside, an old canteen, still containing some liquid. I sniffed it. Water. I felt like crying. I swallowed in quick gulps, almost choking. The taste was strange, but it didn't matter. I sat on the floor, leaning against the dirty wall. I picked up the recorder. I pressed play. Sophie's voice filled the space. "Daddy! Daddy! Look!" I stopped. It wasn't safe to hear everything, but I needed to feel it. That vibration in her voice, as if she were right next to me, speaking softly. I closed my eyes. But then, I heard a different sound, not on the recorder. In reality, someone coughed. I jumped up, pulling out the small blade I'd hidden in the shaft of my boot. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. On the other side of the structure, a thin, hooded man was staring at me. He had a simple backpack on his back. He didn't appear to be armed. "Easy, easy," he said, hands up. "I'm just passing through." "Passing where?" "Nowhere. Just walking." I took a good look at him. Disheveled hair, sunken eyes, calloused hands. It was like looking into an aged mirror. He slowly took off his backpack. He opened it. "I have this," he said, tossing a small, packaged bar, canned food. His confidence made me suspicious, but I accepted. I ate half. I saved the rest. "Have you been around here for a while?" I asked. "Since the world stopped." "Is someone waiting for you?" He shook his head. "And you?" he replied. It took me a while. "Maybe. A girl. My daughter." For a few minutes, we weren't strangers. We were two shards of the same broken mirror, But soon this moment of near peace was interrupted. A noise in the distance, screams and footsteps. Several. Did they follow you? I think so. Without hesitation, pointed to a side passage. Run. I'll take care of this. Why? I asked. I don't know, but someone has to do something right every now and then. I left. I ran once more, with Sophie's voice hammering in his chest, with the taste of blood and sand in his mouth, and with the strange feeling that in that broken world there were still small gestures of kindness, even if they were rare.
I walked, aimless, unsure if he was truly free, but that was it. Walking, one leg in front of the other, walking until the world ended again. The city was left behind, or what was left of it. The buildings lost their shape, the windows turned to sand, the signs of life faded with time and abandonment. And then only the desert remained. Dry, coarse sand, orange as rust. The wind whispered softly, carrying grains that scratched the skin, got into the eyes, the teeth, the thoughts. I tied a cloth over my face, pulled up my hood, lowered my head, and followed. Crossing that stretch was suicide, but turning back wasn't an option. Nathan had given me a chance. I owed him that. Each step sank deeper into silence. That's when the mind started screaming. Memories came like mirages, and I no longer knew if they were real or just my mind's twisted way of keeping me distracted. I saw Leah, smiling. She wore that blue dress, ripped at the hem, and twirled in the middle of a square that no longer exists. Sophie ran around, tripping over her own legs. I held a recorder, the same one, recording everything, laughing with them. I was happy. I didn't know, but I was. The vision faded as a gust of wind blew sand into my mouth. I spat, I cursed, and I moved on. The storm was coming. I could smell it in the air. The recorder was still with me. I clutched it to my chest, protecting it with my body. That's what keeps me alive. That little sound, that memory, this invisible thread that connects me to her. The Sophie who may no longer exist. The Sophie I still hear in the dark, even when the whole world decides to scream. I took out my compass. It still worked, but the north didn't tell me anything. I needed another direction. It was then that I saw in the distance a silhouette, a piece of metal cutting across the horizon. A tower, tall, thin, threatened by decades of abandonment, but still standing. Maybe from there I could see something. Perhaps. My tiredness gave me a break, as if my body understood the importance of the moment. I set off. With his backpack light, his throat dry, the blood still soaked into his shirt, and with the recorder in his pocket, more valuable than any weapon.
Climbing that was a mistake. Every step I took was a deal with death. One slip, and it would all end there. But the view could give me what no other map could. Perspective. The base of the tower swayed silently in the wind. The bolts were rusted, the steps covered in sand. But the structure still stood stubbornly, as if refusing to fall, as if screaming, "I'm still here." I took a deep breath. I tested the first supports. They creaked. What am I doing? I thought. But I continued. I climbed slowly, each hand reaching for the next step, each foot seeking balance.
The wind blew stronger the higher I went, bringing with it that strange humming sound that I sometimes mistake for voices. Voices that don't exist. Or there are too many. Halfway up, I didn't look down. I'd made that mistake before. Not in height, but in hesitation. Hesitating was what had wasted my time. What had made me stand still when I should have run after Sophie that morning. Now, every step was also an apology, a silent plea. I don't hesitate anymore. I reached the top. The structure creaked like a wounded animal. I grabbed onto a leaning beam and, for a moment, everything was silent. And then the world appeared. On every side, an endless desert. The remains of buried buildings, the wreckage of cars fused to the ground. Dead trees like petrified sculptures. The ancient roads were scars in the body of the earth, covered by sand but still visible like ghost trails. To the west was what looked like an old dam, dry, cracked, with concrete rubble hanging at gravity-defying angles. To the east, what remained of a city. A few towers still stood, but only shells, like steel skeletons. To the south, something different. There, on the horizon, an artificial hill, too symmetrical to be natural, like a constructed formation, perhaps a post, perhaps a sector. I remembered the recording. From the words Nathan repeated so carefully. Target confirmed, awaiting pickup confirmation for Sector 9. Sector 9. That thing, to the south, seemed to fit. A secluded place, far enough away from everything, but structured enough not to be random. She. The sentence escaped my lips, almost soundless. I descended more carefully than I had ascended. Every muscle ached, my arms were shaking, my knees were giving out. But in my chest was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Direction. No hope yet. That was dangerous. Hope is fragile, easily shattered. But direction is different. I knew where to go. Reaching the base of the tower, I needed a few minutes to catch my breath. I sat in the thin shaded cast and took the last sips of water from the leaky bottle. The landscape stared at me. Empty. Raw. And yet, I felt something. I touched my pocket. The recorder was there, warm from my heat. I pressed the play button. The only recording. The same voice. That little laugh. The sound of a childhood that the world tried to swallow. The living reminder of who she was, and who I still am because of her. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "I'll come back to you, daughter," I whispered. "Even if I have to go through hell with bleeding feet, with my soul tearing, with every part of me begging to give up, even so, I'm going." And then I heard something. Steps. I stopped the recording. I jumped up, alert. I thought about Nathan. Had he followed me? But it wasn't Nathan. There were two men walking along the horizon where the desert met the rubble. They didn't look like wanderers. They carried weapons. They wore improvised uniforms. I ducked down, hiding behind a pile of bricks. They paused for a second. One of them looked toward the tower. Had they seen me? They talked briefly, then continued on their way. North. I waited until they disappeared. It wasn't safe to stay there. The sound of the recorder might have given me away. But it didn't matter. Now I had a destiny. The south. The artificial hill. The possible Sector 9. I got up, adjusted my backpack, checked the pocket knife at my waist, the only weapon I had left, and continued on. With every step, the wind whispered behind me, or maybe just testing me. But it doesn't matter. I wasn't going to stop.
The wind has changed. It was subtle at first, but for those who live on the road, even the slightest unusual breath is a warning. On the horizon, a brown shadow began to rise, thin, almost invisible, still. But I knew what was coming. The desert does not forgive those who ignore its signs. I quickened my pace. The air grew drier, and the first gust brought grains of sand that scratched my face. I pulled my scarf over my mouth and nose. With each gust of wind, I felt its strength grow. I looked around, looking for anything that could serve as shelter. Nothing but jagged dunes and some half-buried metal debris. Then I saw movement, not the kind the storm carries, but human. About 50 meters away, a small figure was hunched over, hands digging into the sand. I moved closer, trying to see better through the growing fog. It was a child. He was digging desperately, as if every second were vital. "Hey!" I shouted, but my voice was almost lost in the wind. She didn't even look back. She continued to sweep away the sand, revealing what appeared to be the narrow mouth of a metal pipe. The wind was strong enough to whip at my clothes now, and the sand was already cutting into my exposed skin. Just as I was about to reach the child, she managed to clear enough space to squeeze into the tube. Without hesitation, she disappeared into the darkness. I didn't think twice. I threw myself behind. The opening was narrow, and the accumulating sand was already clogging the path. I crawled inside, my arms and legs scraping against the cold, rusted metal. Outside, the roar of the wind grew louder, drowning out all other sounds. I followed the child through the darkness to a point where the tube widened and became a small underground chamber. The walls were cracked concrete, with scraps of fabric hanging from them as if trying to imitate curtains. A makeshift generator in the corner spit out a low hum, feeding a dim yellowish light. And that's when I realized we weren't alone. Leaning against the wall were two more children, each about 11 years old. They were thin, their clothes patched, their eyes wide. One of them was trembling. The other, more steadfast, held a short-bladed knife pointed directly at me. As the dim light wavered, something about the latter's face struck me like a distant memory. A feature, an expression similar to Sophie's. The dim light made me unsure. My little girl would be 24 now, a grown woman. I might not recognize her if I saw her now. But in that moment, the resemblance made me think of how time had passed so quickly, and how I was still here, trying to reach her. The child I had followed closed the entrance to the tube with a piece of metal, trying to stop the sand from entering. Then he looked at me, still panting. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the distant sound of the storm above. 3 pairs of eyes stared at me. None of them seemed willing to trust. And I, trapped down there, knew that any wrong move could cause a storm inside too. What could I do to prevent this shelter from becoming my tomb?